There is very compelling evidence to suggest that the U.S. government is in absolute possession of exotic material that is not made by humans. Something huge and round, and what was described to me as black as a devil, starts to rise to the surface. And right as this thing is about, and by the way, it's the size of a small island and round. Right as this thing is about to break the surface, it sucks the missile down and disappears. And it was bigger than the offshore derrick that it was passing, because you could see in the video the offshore derrick, and you could see this thing zip right by it. You create this bubble artificially using a certain energetic source at a certain frequency, and it interacts with certain material, certain metamaterial, and I got to be careful exactly what I say, but certain skin of the craft. Then the way you experience time inside that bubble is perhaps fundamentally different than the way you might experience space-time outside that bubble, because you're not subject to the effects of gravity. Before you hit that button and launch, give us a call, because it might be a UFO, right? And we don't want to start World War III because either side mistakes a UFO for an ICBM.
Right.
And that's how serious they took the topic. I mean, that's real. That's a real memo that existed between the United States and Russia. There are these scrolls, in fact, that are in the Vatican archives, and they talked about these flaming Roman shields in the sky that would follow them from battle space to battle space. And when you look at what the Vatican is, I mean, really, it's probably the world's oldest, most capable intelligence organization.
Luis Elizondo recently appeared on the Joe Rogan Experience podcast, where he discussed his experiences and insights into UFOs, now referred to as Unidentified Anomalous Phenomena, UAP. Elizondo, a former head of the Pentagon's Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, AATIP, shared startling claims about the U.S. government's involvement in extraterrestrial matters. He mentioned a covert program that allegedly involved the retrieval of alien technology and non-human bodies. During the podcast, Elizondo also talked about his new book, Imminent, Inside the Pentagon's Hunt for UFOs, which delves into these topics further. Elizondo's revelations have contributed to a broader conversation about the possibility of extraterrestrial life and the extent of government knowledge and involvement in these phenomena. To hear the full story, click the link in the description.
The things that our military pilots were encountering didn't have that. They didn't have wings. They didn't have rudders and ailerons and control surfaces. They didn't have cockpits. They didn't have engines. No obvious signs of propulsion. They were doing things and maneuvering in ways that, frankly, defied anything that we had in our inventory, and we were pretty certain the enemies didn't have either. Our adversary didn't have these technologies either. And even more perplexing is that they were being encountered over controlled U.S. airspace and over sensitive military installations. There's stuff out there that's like 4K ultra high definition, but it was a wedge-shaped craft.
Wedge-shaped,
like triangular, but like a wedge. Like I don't know how else to describe it. I could draw it for you if you want. I saw vehicles that were doing things that were just left you scratching your head. And they were real, like I said, because you're backing it up with all this other sensor data. There are hundreds and hundreds of videos that the intelligence community and the Department of Defense have. There are these scrolls, in fact, that are in the Vatican archives that discuss, it's a conversation between a Roman soldier and a Roman general, where they describe, there's something called eclipus. Eclipus in Latin means like sun, eclipse, right? Uh-huh. It's the shape of the Roman shield. And they talked about these flaming Roman shields in the sky that would follow them from battle space to battle space. And when you look at what the Vatican is, I mean, really, it's probably the world's oldest, most capable intelligence organization, because they have priests around the world that people will report miracles to, right, or in confessions to, and eventually that gets filtered up to the Vatican. So, talk about, the world's first CIA and KGB. It was the Vatican, baby. Those guys had it going on. And so no wonder they have all this archival information, and some of it relates to UAP. Well, you remember the stories, right, of even Christopher Columbus coming over to the New World. There were some interesting accounts when they're on the water of potentially some sort of UAP interaction. Individual who pulled me aside very privately, and he said, Lou, we were tracking this thing doing, and I won't say the exact speed, but hundreds and hundreds of knots underwater, and it was bigger than our own submarine. Right now, you know how big our submarines are, right? They're huge.
Yeah.
There's an individual who I'm aware of who was a helo pilot, a helicopter pilot back in the late 90s in the Caribbean, and they were doing missile recovery. So what happened is that the Navy would test fire missiles, and then they kind of run out of fuel, they hit the water, and they sink. And at a predetermined time, they pop to the surface, we grab it with a helicopter, bring it back to shore, and we test it for telemetry and make sure that this cruise missile was doing what it was supposed to do. So they're out there in the helicopter, something huge and round, and what was described to me as black as a devil starts to rise to the surface. The water begins to churn, very much like David Fravor's description of the Tic Tac incident and the roiling water. The frogman is so freaked out, he's literally trying to climb the line back up. He's like total Panic at the Disco, right? And the helicopter's like, do we do like an emergency ascent? What the hell's going on here? And right as this thing is about, and by the way, it's the size of a small island and round. Right as this thing is about to break the surface, it sucks the missile down and disappears.
Jesus
and that
Christ.
was, yeah. And Dave Fravor could probably tell you that story a little better than I can. You already have very senior people in our government that have said it's here, whatever it is.
Right.
But these things could also be from under the water. These things could be something that is as natural to Earth as the little beasties were, right, when we first discovered them. Maybe they've been here all along. And they have interfered with our nuclear capabilities, right? Mm-hmm. From a military perspective, that looks an awful lot like something we call IPB, Initial Preparations of the Battle Space, or perhaps even ISR, Intelligence, Surveillance, and Reconnaissance. Whenever we're going to go into a foreign country and invade, we do long-range surveillance. We want to know how the enemy operates, how they react. We probably should not tip our hands to the fact that we are aware of it publicly, because what happens the moment that the bad guys in a foreign country find our surveillance team over the border? We've got 12 hours. We got to invade, because the element of surprise is now over. So some may feel in the government the mere fact of acknowledging this, if there is some sort of malintent, may push up artificially a clock that exists somewhere for these things to say, okay, the foolish humans are now, the cat's out of the bag. They know we're here. We need to go in now for whatever reason they may have. So that is the military mindset potentially of some of these individuals who want to keep this secret.
So they're worried about an actual invasion.
People say, well, they're like, they don't want us to nuke ourselves. Well, I discuss it in what I wrote, that there's no data to suggest that. They didn't stop us from dropping atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki and vaporizing 500,000 living souls. They didn't stop us when we started developing nuclear weapons from the atomic age. They didn't stop the proliferation of nuclear weapons. They didn't stop the testing in the Nevada range of atomic and nuclear weapons. And now, how many countries have atomic weapons and nuclear weapons? A lot, right? They didn't stop Chernobyl. They didn't stop Fukushima. They didn't stop 3 Mile Island. So to say that they're here to help us, I'm not sure there's data. When it comes to what the government may or may not have in its possession, all I can simply say is that there is very compelling evidence to suggest that the U.S. government is in absolute possession of exotic material that is not made by humans. Now, beyond that, I can't really expound upon. I haven't been given permission to talk. And you want it to be insulated from the effects of Earth's gravity. So you create this bubble artificially using a certain energetic source at a certain frequency, and it interacts with certain material, certain metamaterial. And I got to be careful exactly what I say, but certain skin of the craft, this aluminum via the cup here, and all of a sudden, whoop, you have this bubble around you where what you see on the outside is not necessarily what you see on the inside. In fact, it's now become possible. Kind of think of like a unifying theory. Mm-hmm. And so if you had the ability to create this bubble around you in a localized area that insulated you from the effects of Earth's gravity, then the way you experience time inside that bubble is perhaps fundamentally different than the way you might experience space-time outside that bubble, because you're not subject to the effects of gravity, which would explain potentially why things don't need wings and why they don't need propulsion systems like that, right? So it's a completely different way of looking at how we understand physics. Doesn't have any of that attributable compromise. It's not, these objects aren't slowing down. They're not changing their performance capabilities. They can do the same thing that we're seeing in the air and possibly in space and even underwater. So that is a fundamentally different type of technology than we are used to dealing with. An object that, do you know how large an offshore oil derrick is? They're huge, right?
Yeah.
They're like almost like a small city, right? They're like one city block. They're huge. They're enormous things. There is a video that shows one of these objects underwater that goes by. The speed was calculated between 450 and 550 knots underwater, and it was bigger than the offshore derrick that it was passing, because you could see in the video the offshore derrick, and you could see this thing zip right by it. Right. So that exactly why do we use the term UAP? Right now, it's unidentified anomalous phenomenon because it's all domain. Initially, it was UFO, unidentified flying object. And for several reasons, they changed the name. One of them, not just because of stigma like people think, but because the word flying object means flight. And you have to have wings to fly. That's flight. And these things don't have wings. So that term, we're not even sure is even accurate anymore because they're not necessarily flying. We see them underwater. We see them super high altitude. So the term was changed to unidentified aerial phenomenon. But again, that did not encompass all the observations we were seeing. So now the term UAP, I think the latest description of it is unidentified anomalous phenomenon, to help describe this multi-domain or transmedium characteristic that we are beginning to see and record that these things can do. Strange things sometimes. And I think the government was very worried about that.
What's the most compelling modern thing that you've seen?
Oh my God, I can't talk about it, unfortunately. This is my frustration, Joe, because I know what I've seen. I know what my colleagues have seen, right? And to this day, there's video that's coming in on a regular routine basis that is very, very compelling. But we trusted each other enough to say, look, before you hit that button, if you see something coming over the horizon, before you hit that button and launch, give us a call because it might be a UFO, right? And we don't want to start World War III because either side mistakes a UFO for an ICBM.
Right.
And that's how serious they took the topic. I mean, that's real. That's a real memo that existed between the United States and Russia. I had the conversation here is because our government had placed so much emphasis and interest trying to stigmatize this topic that it almost worked too well. Now we're at the point where we should be having this conversation and people still don't want to because they think it's crazy. You think of tinfoil hats and Elvis on the mothership, when in reality, we're talking about a real national security issue. I mean, these things are here. You have, Joe, you have a former director of national intelligence, Ratcliffe, a former director of CIA, Brennan. You have former presidents all coming out and saying, yeah, there's something to it. It's real, right? Now, what it is, where it's from and all that stuff, I'm not sure we're quite ready to go there yet. But the acknowledgement is, hey, man, yeah, this is real. It's not ours. And we probably should do something about it.